Thank you for joining me again for another night of Facebook Live. Also, I want to give thanks and recognition to those that take time out to join us on the replay from YouTube and or SoundCloud. It is indeed a blessing to be here with you tonight, and I hope that your day has been blessed and that you were able to get out and enjoy some of the beautiful sunshine in the warm weather that we're having uh, these days. It's indeed a wonderful break from having been inside and from the rain. Guys, tonight we're on day 2 of our Suffering in Silence series, and tonight we want to address the issues relating to body image. And as you are joining me and tuning in tonight, please go ahead and feel free to like and share this video so that others can join in the conversation with us as well. So again, tonight we are discussing issues that we women deal with in regards to body image. And that could be any number of things, because as we age, we know that our body begins to change. But did you know that even young women that are in the prime of their lives and just beginning to experience life, making that transition in from adolescence into young adulthood, they too sometimes deal with issues as it relates to a self-perceived image of their body. And so I feel like tonight would be as good as any to follow up with this topic of body image after last night's conversation about childhood abuse and sexual violations, because I believe that these things are directly related in some ways. Now, that may not be the issue for all of us women, but I do believe that women who are victims of sexual violence as young children tend to carry the weight of distorted images of themselves as they age and grow into adulthood, especially in those moments to where we feel like in those areas where we're now in a relationship and we have to make decisions based upon intimacy. So when we don't have a good self-perception of our body and what we look like, or maybe there's flaws, then it also affects our ability to be intimate with our partners. Other issues that are directly related to our issues with body image are illnesses. Now, we know that cancer is a big thing in our society now. Cancer wears heavy, and as a result, women are having to get mastectomies, and then they face reconstructive surgeries and things of that sort. And as a result, sometimes we just don't feel good about our bodies. And there are other sicknesses and disease that affect how we feel about our bodies. Arthritis. We know that arthritis sometimes causes our bones to be crippled and to ache. And so our body then begins to take on different forms, variations of swelling and inflammation. Then there's also lupus. Lupus affects the bones and the joints. Not only that, but it also affects the skin. And so we women go through all these changes, looking at our bodies and not liking what we see. And we suffer through these things, and we suffer through it in silence. It is just something that we do not talk about. I don't know why we don't talk about these issues. And then when a young lady is faced with addressing some of these issues, or becoming more aware that these issues, she's having these issues with this perception of her body, who does she talk to? Because at that time, we feel like we're the only ones dealing with the situation. Now, I've had a situation in the past several years with tumors. And they call them fibroid tumors, I believe. And I did not know how common these tumors were in women, because I've never heard anyone talk about it. But how I began to notice that something was different is that in the area of my stomach, I've always had a reasonably flat stomach. But I noticed that in that area it was beginning to grow, and my clothes didn't fit good, and I only felt comfortable in clothes that were elastic. Hello, how are you? Shondell, thanks for joining me. I only felt comfortable in elastic wear. But then I noticed that when I would have my monthly cycles and things like that, it would begin to be so heavy that I would make a mess all over myself, and I could not understand where this was coming from. I just didn't understand it. No pain or anything like that. It's just that I knew that my body was changing, and I did not like what I seen. I didn't like the way it felt. I didn't like what I seen, and I didn't know who to talk to about it. So I began to do research on what was going on with my body and why it was going on, only to find out that that's what it was. It was called uterine fibroids. And it's more common to us women than we know. And usually they want to treat this situation with giving you a hysterectomy. So a hysterectomy is a way that our doctors here in this rural area wants to deal with the issues. But as I did research, I found doctors in the Dallas area that was dealing with, were specializing in this situation with women. And so I decided to go with the treatment rather than the surgery of having the hysterectomy and things of that nature. Another issue that we women have with our bodies is bladder issues. Now, we've been conditioned to believe that leakage of the bladder is normal as we age. But did you know that that's not normal? That there's actually some underlying issues going on with our bodies if we're leaking in our bladder? And not only that, we know that if our bladder is leaking, that causes other insecurities of smelling like urine or having an accident on ourselves. So it affects our ability to go out in public and feel comfortable. It affects our ability Also goes back to the intimacy for those of us that have partners or spouses that we have to play that intimate role. So there are all kinds of things that goes on in our bodies, and we're not talking about it, guys. So where does that leave us when we need that little extra support and or encouragement? And how do we take this conversation and bring it to the forefront for our young women that are cutting themselves because they don't feel pretty, or they don't feel like in their bodies measure up to the image of the celebrities or things like that? Now, it's easy to say, well, they got the money and they can go and get the surgeries and things like that, but that's minimizing the whole issue that we have as it pertains to our self-perception of our bodies. We only get one. And I find that we can go out and do all this stuff to our bodies, but what are we going to do with this mind? It's easy to feel pretty when we dress it up and when we make it up, portraying the confidence that we have and portraying that we love the body we're in. But what happens when we come back to reality? What happens when the clothes come off? What happens when the makeup comes off? It is a conversation that needs to be had. We need to love the skin that we're in, flaws and all. Flaws and all, guys, because I've been in the nursing field for 23, 24 years now. I've never seen a perfect body. And as perfect as I would like to think my body is, but I have to love who I am. I have to love what God gave me. I have to appreciate the flaws and all. To let it wear on our minds and to allow it to cause us to feel less than what we are. To some of us, it's just a thorn in our flesh, and it'll be that because there's nothing we can do to correct that. What about weight? What about us women that have aged to the point to where maybe we're a little heavier than we like to be? What about cellulite? The cellulite that begins to attack our skin and our extremities. Is it possible that we can love ourselves wholeheartedly and just appreciate that regardless of what issues we're dealing with in our body, we shouldn't be ashamed to have this conversation with someone that we know could possibly be struggling with some of these body image issues? I find it therapeutic that I can sit here and talk to you and share with you the issues that I have. Something that I may not otherwise would even discuss with somebody because of the stigma of the shame of somebody else knowing that I've had issues. But it's time out for acting like we've got it all together. There are women out here suffering. There are women out here dealing with sicknesses that are affecting their bodies, and they don't feel pretty, and they don't feel desirable, and it impacts their entire life. When we have issues with our body and the image of the perception that we have of our bodies, if it's distorted, it not only affects the physical body, but it has an effect also on the emotional compartments of our body. This is the only temple we have. And you can have any amount of surgeries or use any type of products to try to fix all of that. But in the end, I don't know that we're ever going to be satisfied, guys. We just have to simply learn to love ourselves and appreciate the fact that as bad as it may seem, it could be worse, I guess, in some sense. If we have legs, be grateful if those legs are strong enough to walk. If we have weight that we're struggling with, let's just take it one day at a time. Let's be loving and encouraging to one another so that we don't feel like we have to be perfect. We don't feel like we have to compete with one another. If we're just supportive and we're loving and encouraging, sometimes that kind word or just sharing something that we're dealing with when we have an opportunity to sit down with other women, sometimes that makes all the difference in the world. Let's see what we got. Yes, fibroids are very common. Now, I believe that was a topic that was in the conference where I met you in Dallas. That was one of the topics that they talked about the fibroids and how common it was, especially in us black women. And they said that the research linked the fibroids back to the birth control that our parents were using and also that we used as young women. So that was the link to the uterine fibroids that so many people are living with. And some of us with those fibroids have pain with it, others don't. But I know that what got my attention is when my abdomen began to look as if I was pregnant. And that was unusual for me. So that was one of the things that got my attention when it related to fibroids. And I look at women all the time, and sometimes that a question that crossed my mind when I look at the body and how it begins to change and the issues that these women go through. And so that is something where I'm not ashamed to have that conversation. Now, when I'm in a room or in an area to where women are, and we strike up a conversation, and sometimes I'm the one that's initiating the conversations now, guys, and sometimes you have to be the one to initiate the conversation. It's okay. You'd be surprised how many women are dealing with some of the same similar issues that you deal with yourself. And you help people and you empower people by talking about it. But sometimes in our minds, we think that they're going to laugh at us, or they're going to think that we're crazy, or, I can't talk to her about that. But I'm a firm believer now that if it crosses my mind, it's on my mind for a reason. So I call that being spirit-led a lot of times. I'm sitting here sharing with you the issues that I've had in my body, and I don't know who's looking. I don't know who's listening. I don't know who's watching. And you know what? I really don't care. Because somebody's going to hear this, and they need to know that how they perceive their body, how the issues that they're dealing with, that they're not the only ones. They're not the only ones. They are not alone. Yeah. That's what fibroids do. It really reconstructs our body to where we think that we are pregnant. And most doctors, not knowing or not really privy on the issues, their solution is to put you under the knife. Take things out of your body. And if we're not talking about it, people are having hysterectomies and surgeries and things like this that is not necessary. Another thing, I can't say what a woman feels like that has had mastectomies, because I know that that's another issue that's becoming common now. But what I can say is that she's still beautiful. She's not defined by her breast. She's not defined by her sickness or her disease. She's still beautiful. I've had women that I didn't know that had mastectomies, and they talked to me about it. And then that allows me an opportunity to think and put myself in that place. And then I look and they're glowing and they're beautiful. So we're not defined by our flaws. That is something that we have allowed the society to impose upon us. Like I said, guys, when we get ready to come together, start having these conversations, and sharing what the alternatives are, sharing what the alternatives are for the issues that we're dealing with, how we dealt with it, what treatments did we seek, how are we dealing with excess weight, how do we deal with the cellulite, how do we deal with the arthritis and the pain and the things that we go through, how are we dealing with this? So when we begin to talk about these, then when a young lady comes along and she's suffering through the same thing, then she knows that there's hope. She knows that when a situation arises, that she's not the only one. So we know that when we don't like what we look at, when we look in the mirror, that we're still worthy of love. We don't have to allow that to affect the intimate areas of our life. We can embrace who we are, physically and emotionally. I appreciate you guys taking out the time to join me tonight. Tomorrow, we'll be on day 3 of Suffering in Silence. I encourage you ladies to find your voice, to speak out, because regardless of how perfect you feel like another lady is, we all suffer in silence in some area or another when it comes to our image or perception of our body. Let's give that a voice. Let's speak up. Let's share. Let's love on one another. Let's give each other hope and encouragement and the support that's necessary. You guys have a good night. We'll see you here tomorrow.